Paul Garcia. This is my ATP699 week 3 video for my professional growth plan. And I'm asked to go ahead and talk about some growth and some areas, the various literacies that we learned about in ATP 600. First area where I've grown, I would say, is in assessment literacy, especially with the understanding of um, when it comes to using rubrics for self-assessment. Brookhart says in her book that you want to keep your students using rubrics and transferring the learning onto them. And by having rubrics that are not score based, but rather based to have marks of progress showing not near standard, meeting standard, far from standard, and teaching your students how to use rubrics, that's a really important thing to do. So I did that in my um, classes here using it was our persuasive essay. And it allowed my students a chance to show some of their learning um, and progress in their writing as they submitted assignments, and I would collaborate with them and through our Google Classroom and give it back to them. And they were able over a 3 period to use a graphic organizer and do a couple of rough drafts and ultimately come up with essays that were improved because they had rubrics. Another part of the assessment literacy that I grew in was really came from Frey in Frey's book. She talked about how, let's see here, I'm trying to find the title here. Oh, the Formative Assessment Action Plan for Frey and Fisher, The Practical Steps to More Successful Teaching and Learning. That was published in 2011. Now, they talked about, they wrote about in their book uh, the ability to take formative assessments and use those to improve your student learning by narrowing your focus on those students who really needed to understand what was taught because they obviously didn't understand it in the formative assessment. So quickly diagnosing what was wrong, communicating to those students in small groups or one-on-one what they needed to do different, and then letting them know how they could improve their score and giving them a chance to practice again and then reassessing them was a really key part of the assessment literacy. I think another piece of the program where I really grew in terms of my literacy was, um, I'd say, my digital literacy. My specialization was advanced assessment literacy, but there was so much to digital literacy that I learned in that. I wasn't using Google Classroom prior to these courses. As a matter of fact, I think I just started using it maybe 2.5 months ago. And it has become such an integral part of what I do in my class. Um, I've put on quizzes in there. I've used created quizzes through Google. I have shared quiz sites into my Google Classroom and had students create complete quizzes that way. Unfortunately, some were no better than just the accelerated reader quizzes that teachers had created on other sites. And so my students said, Mr. Garcia, it's the same exact quiz that we just took with accelerated reader that you found for us on this other site. And I had no idea because I don't take all the accelerated reader quizzes. Um, but Google Classroom as a way to assess students with assessments that I can create. I can create multiple choice quizzes, and then I can put in a short writing, which is really important to get my students documenting and citing text correctly, especially 2 quotes and 2 citations per, 2 evidences per writing is really key in grade 6. Um, quizzes has been something that I've used quite a bit to check for formative assessments. My students love using Kahoot as a way. There's limitations to all the digital things as well because, um, I can't track what all my students are doing all the time. And just like any other assessment you would choose, they all going to have their limitations. But some of the pre-made quizzes, they're not exactly what you're maybe teaching in your curriculum, and they're not um, allowing you to access the data that every single student is answering. Sometimes it reinforces more learning than it does let you know what the students are doing. But digital literacy, that was a big area of growth. Um, Gosh, I think in the social emotional literacy, you know what I learned the most about my initial inquiry question was about how do I keep a really strong learning environment in my classroom so that I can maximize student learning in my class. And actually, this was one of my first few classes. It might have been in um, AIL 620. I learned that through my own research, what it comes down to is the teacher student relationship. That's the key factor. There were studies done in Australia where between boys and girls, it came down to the teacher's ability to build a relationship with a student. In college, I read research that said if a student believes that the teacher wants them and the teacher believes them, and that the student believes the teacher wants the student to be there that day, that can improve the student's scores. And all the way down to elementary school, that those students who believed that their teacher believed in them were the ones who were performing higher than their peers. So, along with that social emotional piece is really the idea of being that shepherd teacher, that shepherd teacher, me the shepherd, and I'm shepherding a group of sheep, the sheep being my students in my class, that they would need um, to be taught and cared for. So, as a former pastor, that really rung true with me. The ability to build those relationships with my students and really keep that going. Let's see here if I can remember who that was. The Brookhart quote from earlier was from 2013 for how to create and use rubrics for formative assessments and grading. And I can't remember this very second, the shepherding. But it came from the gentleman who actually set up this program, um, the AAL program and the whole AIL program. Let's see here. So, how is this growth demonstrated? Um, well, as I said, in the assessment literacy, that's been something that I've been using with my formative assessments in math. We have formative assessments that are written into our math curriculum, but they're not always tied to the standard uh, in the most effective way because the learning objectives aren't often, well, they're not always written in the most student friendly terms. So rewriting those and making sure I've got assessments that really connect are really important, connected to my formative assessments. And then I poll groups every single day. And that group that I poll when I'm done with my, you know, I do we teaching and then the we do, and before I release them into the individual you do teaching, work on the problem, I'm pulling students to me, those students who have struggled, and after they do our quick check problem, what's the problem? Is it a knowledge based? Is it an application based? Is it just a computation error? And I've got to diagnose that quickly and talk to my students and then feed forward into what they need to do. And that feed up, feed back, and feed forward that Frey and Fisher talked about is so key for me in my assessment literacy. When it comes to my digital literacy, like I said, that Google Docs has been huge for me in just getting out work to my students and assessing students. Tomorrow, I'm not going to be at work. I've got jury duty and I've already got my day all lined out. My sub plans are to my sub, tell my students to check the Google Doc and you follow what's on the whiteboard, and with a couple notes about my students and things that might be going on in the school. But my students know to go to the Google Classroom, and that's where they can find their work for the day. They can find the links to the reading through News ELA. They can find the various quizzes that they're going to need to complete on the day. They can submit their writing assignment that we've been working on, our informative writing. There's so many things about that digital literacy that Google Classroom that really has changed my classroom and freed me up and allows for a lot more um, individual attention in some ways for my students because there's so much dialogue going back and forth between the students and I. Communication digitally, that is. And when it comes to the social emotional literacy, um, that's an area where I've grown Like I said, my previous career was a youth pastor, and so there was a lot of student relationship building, but I didn't realize the impact of the one individual upon the student's life to make that impact, that the teacher can make that impact. There was even one of our teachers at the very end of our AAL, I think it was our professor for AAL 656, who he just kind of said off the cuff one night, yeah, we can tell how far a student will go in their academic career when the parents enroll them for kindergarten, and that's usually based on the mom's education level. I thought, my goodness, we spend all this time pouring all this energy into, you know, good teaching, and we should, and good teaching practices. And when it comes down to it, the mom, her grade level, her academic level, highest academic level, could be the waterline for the kids. We're setting the bar there, and I get that as just what I've done in life and seen what others have done. But then he said something. But you know what? Then again, those teachers in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, if they can make a difference in that student's life and get that student to fall in love with learning, then we have a chance to change things. And I'd hate to believe that wholeheartedly, that basically it's only those three grades. I think it's even more. I think it gets harder as the years go by for students to, they codify, they start to believe that they're not good at math, or I'm just not good at writing, and they start to settle into negative mindsets, and out of that just won't try. But I think the teacher still plays a role no matter the grade level in influencing the student. Let's see here. In which area do you need improvement, and how will you expand your knowledge in this area? I would say that for me, it's going to be in the content literacy. We're getting new history curriculum next year, and in sixth grade, I think in 2 years, we're getting a new science curriculum, and we've already got the next generation science standards. We're using old science books, old curriculum, and we've got to find new material all the time just to meet those standards. But we will start to be held accountable in just a few years, just as fifth grade is already. Fifth grade on the California SBAC, they have to give the ELA, the math, and the science. And that's coming down the pike for sixth grade as well. It's coming down the pike for a lot of different grade levels, but for sixth grade especially. So there's so much when it comes to the content of the curriculum and understanding the standards that I really need to grow in. Because honestly, as a sixth grade teacher, I focus so much on ELA and math, as those are the two biggest areas where students are assessed, that it's sometimes to the disadvantage of the other subject matter. So, as I continue to have more understanding, and as I spend more time this summer prepping for my math and prepping the ELA for next year, and looking at what those formative assessments are going to be, and looking at how to better teach what I've been given, and using my school district curriculum as just one of the resources, a main resource most likely for ELA and math for sure, but ELA most likely, uh, using it as one of the curriculum pieces, that's going to be key to growing in my content literacy. So it's just going to take time. It's going to take me mastering one and being able to, or a better handle, mastery is a big word, but being able to get a better handle on it. And then it'll free me up to spend more time with another. So this next year it'll be history, and the following year it'll be science. So thank you so much. Appreciate the entire program and what I've been able to gather, especially in the area of formative assessment and digital literacy. Thank you.